shop.
Excellent, you made it back. Welcome for another, well, shall I say, welcome back for another episode of What's in the Shop. Today, we are talking about one of the most important, I hate saying this word, the P word, punk bands in American music history. We'll get to that in a minute. Well, no, let's talk about that now. We're going to talk about X. Is X really a punk band? I don't know. I don't think so. I think they have way too much more going on than a typical stupid punk band just ranting about politics and economics. I mean, X, well, let me put it to you this way. How many punk bands are comprised of a husband and wife vocal team? I can't think of any. So right there, I think, disqualified. And anyway, X blends in country music, rockabilly, 50s doo-wop, I mean, full-on muscled, purebred American rock and roll. They have so much different stuff going into their music that it just makes for, that's why I say, they're just a great American rock and roll band. Think about Bruce Springsteen. He sang about the working man, cars, getting up early, going to work. Kind of picture X like a Springsteen, but from the wrong side of the tracks, with a lot more muscle and anger. That's kind of where X is. But anyway, let's get into X and talk about why they are so important and what we have in the shop, because we basically have their whole 80s catalog here in the shop, minus one album, minus two albums, I just realized. But hey, whatever, we got the goods right here. Before we start again, let me just say one quick thing about X. I think a good way to describe who X is and what X is was written by Robert Christgau, who we refer to often, who was a music critic in the Village Voice from New York City during the 70s and 80s. And I think he's still around, I'm not sure. But anyway, he kind of summed up X's whole vibe when he said, they're sexy thrift shopping bohos who think Charles Bukowski is Norman Mailer or Henry Miller. This may not be exactly the aura they crave, but combined with some great tunes, it enables them to make a smart argument for a desperately stupid scene. And that's where I'm coming from, because punk overall, it is kind of stupid, except for a few key bands. X, however, in Los Angeles were seen as real flag bearers of the LA punk scene. And in fact, their first album, Los Angeles, is seen as a punk classic, but also a forerunner to the whole hardcore movement. If you want to talk about stupid movements, that's pretty stupid. But anyway, let's get into the albums like I keep saying, and I keep getting sidetracked. X, okay, huge players on the LA punk scene. I say it's just full-on muscle, purebred American rock and roll. They run into, well, first of all, let's just back up a second here and say, John Doe and Exene met at a poetry workshop because they have a big love for poetry and literature. And in fact, many critics have cited that it's almost basically pure poetry put to punk rock sounding music. Their songs, which in a way, I guess it kind of is. They're not doofuses, in other words. And in fact, a lot of times people cite that they're so similar to Charles Bukowski and Norman Mailer, like Christgau said. And who's the guy who wrote the spy novels? I can't think of his name off the top of my head. It'll come to me at some point, and then I'll blurt it out. Raymond Chandler. And they often compare X to these guys because of what they sing about and how they sing it and how they put their stuff in. But anyway, on the LA scene, X were getting really, really, really big, and they ran into Ray Manzarek of The Doors. Now, he was entranced with the way X was doing a cover version before they ever had a record deal of Soul Kitchen. So they ended up getting together, and Ray ended up producing their first 4 albums. Sadly, I don't have the first album that we can't talk about, but at the time they were recording that, they had so many songs that, of course, it was easy to throw up or throw on the songs to the first album. And by the way, John Doe said Ray Manzarek was key in piecing together that first album. But of course, with a lot of the songs left over, they went straight into their second album, which is where we start off with Wild Gift. Let me just point out, well, those keeping notes, this is X's, their second album, came out in 1981. It's their highest charting album, got up to number 76 in the Billboard charts. Pretty good, not bad. Great tunes on this, we'll get to that in a second. But at this time, even though they weren't on a major label, they were so big that they were the first unsigned rock and roll band ever to headline the Greek Theater. No small feat. So that lets you know kind of the vibe and just the momentum that X had at this time in the early 80s, heading out of LA or expanding out of LA, and the reverberations they were making in the music scene. Anyway, second album, great album, Wild Gift, has great songs on here like I Like In This House That I Call Home, White Girl, I think that's my favorite song on this album, I'm Coming Over, Beyond and Back, In This House That I Call Home, I said that, Year One, great. So great that Rolling Stone put this album in their 500 greatest albums of all times. And I mentioned earlier Robert Christgau, this made number 2 in the Village Voice, how did they say it, Paz and Jop poll in 1981. That's the Reader's Rock poll. And Christgau even put it on his personal list for that year of his personal favorite albums as the 3rd top album, which was also the highest placing rock album in the Village Voice Music Critics' personal favorite list. Great band. By the way, I mentioned my favorite song on here, White Girl. Believe it or not, another LA band likes that song, a band you may know called Red Hot Chili Peppers. They sampled that song on their Mother's Milk album for that track, what is it called, Good Time Boys. And I think even if I remember right, in that song they mention, allude to John Doe and say he has a voice of gold, which he does. And again, I can't stress it enough, the combo of him and Exene singing vocal harmonies on these songs, even though they're like full speed ahead punk songs, there's just something about it that's a little off kilter and makes it very endearing and just great. In fact, about this, Robert Christgau in 1981, he said, how often do we get a great love album and a great punk album in the same package? And here you have it in Wild Gift, X's second album. Now, after they recorded that, before they got to their 3rd album, there was a tragedy that influenced X, and that is Exene lost her sister, who she was very close to a drunk driver in a car accident. So by the time they got to the 3rd album, which is Under the Big Black Sun, it's actually dedicated to her sister. I believe her name was Mary. Oh, check it out. Nice little picture here of X. Here we have John Doe, DJ, Bonebrake, Exene, and Billy Zoom. Anyway, X's 3rd album, Under the Big Black Sun, came out in 1982. This was actually, X had so much momentum from their 1st and 2nd album that now, with this album, they're signed to Elektra Records, so they're on a major label. That's a big step. And you start to hear a little more, kind of, like I said, the 50s style in music, a little more country, some nice ballads on here. Great album. Again, I can't say... you have to have every X album from the 80s. Let's just be honest. They're awesome. Great. What can I say? You need to own every one of these albums. Anyway, back to Under the Big Black Sun. They started getting some MTV play from this album. Remember, MTV had just started around this time with The Hungry Wolf, which is a great track. This also has, well, let me go back to, Hungry Wolf, another one of my all-time favorites of X off of this album. Blue Spark, awesome track. Come Back to Me is on here, a nice little kind of 50s ballady type thing. Dancing with Tears in My Eyes. As I said earlier, Exene's sister had died, and so she dedicated this album to her. And of course, some of her sadness was obvious in some of the songs she wrote that her and John wrote, Riding with Mary, about the accident in her sister. And of course there's other tracks on here as well, like Come Back to Me actually is about Exene longing for her sister. Let me just say real quick, it's odd because yes, they're very literate, John and Exene, and have a lot of great lyrics and stuff, but Hungry Wolf, great song, was actually inspired by a painting. Who would expect punks to be inspired by a painting? Especially by a painting by a Polish guy. What was his name? Alfred Kowalski, yes, I think it was Alfred Kowalski. And the painting was actually called The Lone Wolf. And it was just, well, here, check it out. Exene said they were inspired by this painting, but also by the closeness of the band and their inner circle. They called themselves wolves and or a pack. So you take both, combine it, and you get the Hungry Wolf. John Doe said it was actually kind of about marriage and yeah, whatever, relationships in a way like that. But great tune. It's also interesting to note that the song came out, like I said, in '82 on MTV. And at the same time, even though X was singing about the Hungry Wolf, you may have heard and seen another video that was playing a lot, way more than X's video on MTV at that time, about another wolf that was hungry. Duran Duran was singing about hungry like a wolf. About the video as well, Ray Manzarek not only produced the album, but he produced the video. And just for those keeping notes, a few years later, I think in '85, Ray made a new video for the Doors' LA Woman, and he cast John Doe in that. Next up, this would be album number 4, the last great X album, my favorite X album of all time, More Fun in the New World. Funnily enough, Playboy really liked this album, and they were actually big champions of X from day one. They were always giving their albums good review, but they really liked this record. And also another band that began with P likes this record, Pearl Jam. You may have heard of them. In 2004 on their, Vote for Rock tour, Rock the Vote tour, whatever the heck it is, their political nonsense tour, that Pearl Jam were actually covering in most shows this title track, The New World. So Eddie Vedder has good taste because he's playing X. New World, love that track, love it. Poor Girl, great song. True Love, pretty good. Devil Doll, I love that. I See Red, Painting the Town Blue. Hot House, Drunk in My Past. Actually, side 2, almost all of side 2, that's solid gold right there. Side 1 is awesome too, what can I say? But side 2 for me, boom, knocks it out of the park, makes this the most solid and my most favorite X album. Didn't really chart good or anything, but that doesn't matter because this is an amazing record, and I highly recommend if you're going to start out with X, either get the first album or try this. It's a little more pop oriented, not pop as in Britney Spears and Duran Duran type pop, but the hooks, the melodies, they really clean it up, and really, this is just great full-on guitar blasting, rockabilly sounding with Billy Zoom. Well, it's kind of a nice image here of them in concert. Solid record. Check this out. X, More Fun in the New World. We're skipping one, Ain't Love Grand, because I don't have it, and we're ending up with 1987's See How We Are. This is the first album that didn't have the complete original band on it because Billy Zoom had left. And in the interim, they drafted in Dave Alvin from the Blasters. And Dave left right when the album was basically finished or almost in the bag, and they had to reach out for another guitar player from another LA band, Lone Justice, another great band, and they brought in Tony Gilkyson. But we have the finished product, See How We Are, and this is X's last album, studio album of the 80s. After they finished the tour for this album, they put out a live album. I think it was X Live at the Whiskey A Go Go in '88, and the band basically broke up for quite a while. Went quiet, however you want to say. A lot of people slag this off, saying it's not really X or whatever, but I disagree. It sounds a little different. It's not as hard edge, but Dave Alvin gave them the great track 4th of July, which is on here. And actually, take a look at this. I believe this picture is from the 4th of July in Houston, Texas, 1986 or 1987, when the band were playing Fitzgerald's. Like I said, I used to always go see X every time they would come to town in the 80s, a couple times in the 90s, even in the 2000s. I think it was the late 90s when I saw them. But anyway, that is X at Fitzgerald's and playing the fantastic 4th of July. And if I remember right, this show was actually on the 4th of July, and it was hot and sweltering and just out of control. But great album. It's got You, a nice ballad, 4th of July, like I said, fantastic song. Another great ballad, See How We Are. awesome. What can you say? Left and right, when it rains. Cyrano de Berger's back. I love it. This is a great album. As I said, last album of the 80s, last studio album that X did from the 80s, and you need all these X albums. You need all the X albums because they're a great band. Great American rock and roll band, like I said. The Cars, Cheap Trick, Aerosmith, you name it, whatever you want to say. Creedence Clearwater, I don't care what you say. X is up there as well. Many call them a punk band. I just think they're blue-blooded, great American rock and roll band. Check them out. Thanks for spending time with me. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you learned something. Get in touch if you feel like, noisyrecordsmx@hotmail.com, or send a message here if you're watching this on Instagram, or leave a note here on YouTube if you're watching it on YouTube. Thanks for all your input and suggestions, and hey, keep on rocking, everybody. Stay safe. See you soon.